My name is Sam. I'm the Communications Manager here at Fairygodboss. And Fairygodboss is the largest career community for women. Our mission is to improve the workplace by increasing transparency. And we offer a ton of great free resources like anonymous company reviews, job listings, articles, virtual recruiting events, and so much more to help you succeed throughout your career. We will be taking your questions at the end of today's webinar. Please drop them in the Q&A. You'll find that at the bottom of your screen. You can leave questions as yourself or anonymously, so don't be afraid to ask whatever comes to mind. And as a reminder, we'll be getting to them at the end of today's session. We're also recording today's webinar and we'll be sending it out in a follow-up email later today, along with some more information about Plus. So be on the lookout for that in your inbox. Like I mentioned, today's discussion is brought to you in partnership with Paid Leave for the US, otherwise known as Plus. Plus is the national campaign to win paid family and medical leave for everyone in the US. Since 2016, Plus has actually helped win paid leave for over 8 million people through transformative workplace campaigns at some of the top employers in the country, including Walmart and Starbucks. And now they're channeling that momentum into passing national legislation that would bring paid leave to everyone in the US. Moderating today's conversation is Giovanna Gray Lockhart. Giovanna, I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself and our wonderful panelists.
Great. Thanks so much, Samantha. Hi, I'm Giovanna Gray Lockhart. I'm thrilled to be moderating today's important discussion. We are emerging from the wake of a pandemic and national caregiving is at a crisis point. There are over 2 million women who've been forced to leave the workforce. And as you know, thanks to our panelists, we have an exciting opportunity to discuss some legislation that is in the pipeline. President Biden has said that we need paid leave for all and wants to make federal paid leave permanent. So today I'd like to introduce two wonderful panelists, one of whom I'm lucky enough to work with, Orly Cattell, who is the Senior Advisor at Plus, and Shadia Sigala, CEO and co-founder at Kinside. So first, Orly has been part of the founding team at Plus, where she's focused on driving partnerships that move the needle towards passing national legislation that would bring paid leave to everyone in the US, and has worked with companies like Postmates, Thumbtack, Sun Life, and more to help make their paid leave policies more inclusive. Shadia co-founded the billion-dollar company Honeybook and is now solving the child care crisis as CEO and co-founder of Kinside. She was in charge of developing equitable family leave policies at both companies. Thank you both so much for being here, and I'm just gonna jump right in, okay? So for Orly, I know you've been with Plus for a long time, the very start, in fact, and you first started partnering with employees, employers, consumers, and investors to change workplace policies. Have you seen, or sorry, how have you seen workplaces shift their practices and policies on paid leave since you first began working with companies 5 years ago, changed since to today?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. Thrilled to talk with everyone who's here about your paid leave policies at your workplace. I'll start by saying I think it's really important that we ground this conversation in real people, because I think it's very easy to jump into the statistics about who has paid leave and who doesn't have paid leave. And so I think as an opening to the conversation, I'd like to share, just coming out of Father's Day yesterday, something that's really been on my mind, which is that when I was in our early days at Plus a few years ago, we only launched in 2015, we had a call from a dad in New Hampshire who let us know that he had been driving his wife to the hospital because she was in labor and about to have her baby. And he called his boss. He was a security guard with a small employer in New Hampshire. He called his boss to say, my wife's in labor, I'm driving her to the hospital. And his boss said, if you don't come into work today, you're fired. You have to choose between taking your wife to the hospital to have her baby and your job. And he chose his wife. What was he going to do, right? He chose his wife. He brought her to the hospital. She had her baby. And then he was unemployed at a time when he had already been working a minimum wage job, and then they were expanding and growing their family. And we all know that when you welcome a new baby, that's a time of really extreme expense for your family. So I like to start with that story just because I think it really grounds us in the inequities right now of who has paid leave and who doesn't. it was completely legal for his boss to fire him for not coming in because he wasn't even protected for unpaid leave under FMLA since he was with a small employer. So I just like to start with that. I think when we launched our work at Plus, to answer your question, what we really focused on was how do we apply this equity lens of who has access to leave and who doesn't, because the baby of a low wage working person needs their parent just as much as the baby of a CEO. And that extends to other family caregiving, like people who are caring for an aging parent or a spouse with cancer. And when we started, I'll say that it was right around the time that Starbucks was getting a huge amount of good press for their new paid leave policy, which the media was praising them for. And we took a look at the policy and we saw that even though it was, 18 weeks or more, I think, it was only for the folks who worked in the corporate headquarters. There were 3,000 people in that corporate headquarters. There were 160,000 baristas who didn't get access to that policy. So we were the ones who kind of jumped into that conversation to alert the media to that inequity and then work to change Starbucks policy to bring paid leave to the folks that were in the retail arena. And I will say the other big factor in this conversation is when we started, it was almost unheard of for dads to have paid leave at all, except at some of the most elite companies. So what we've really been trying to do is expand this conversation so that paid leave is gender neutral. And as our friends at Deloitte say, also generational neutral, meaning that it's not only to care for a new baby, but also for the millions of people who have to care for an aging parent or a spouse with cancer. There's a lot more we could say about this, but I'll stop there.
You bring up an important point about equity and how paid leave is so tied to gender equity. Shadia, I would love to know, you run a childcare startup, so you really are in the thick of these issues, both getting women back to work, but also you offered paid leave for employees of your company from the very beginning. That's so unusual for startups. Talk to us a little bit about how you decided to do that and how that offering has allowed, a more diverse workforce.
So first, I want to actually call out the great privilege of being in a knowledge worker industry, right? So as Orly mentioned, like my experience with offering paid leave as an employer, which I've been experimenting with now for about 6 or 7 years, is really that it's really much more possible, or maybe much more, it seems more natural. There's a little more ease to it when you work with folks who can work from anywhere with a computer, right? So I just wanted to point that out. That's the kind of context that I'm working with, where so let me start from the beginning. I myself am a mother, right? So there's call out number 2, the fact that, I presume, I think it's like anecdotally that the more that women step into positions of power, you are starting to see more of these family-friendly, human-friendly policies making their ways into companies. Now, I originally co-founded a company called Honeybook, which, as you mentioned, is now a $1 billion company, but it was not always a $1 billion company, right? It was a startup once upon a time. And really early on, so let's see, Honeybook is, I'm going to say 120 employees now. Back when we were about 30 employees, I became pregnant, right? And so first, I actually stepped into this question of paid family leave from a personal perspective, being like, well, I'm pregnant. What should I do? What happens? I was the first person pregnant in the company. So really having that first degree experience going into this problem was really beneficial to the organization, to every employee that came after that. And, obviously that's just for me also calling out the need to have more women in positions of power and authority. So, I knew that whatever policy I put down for myself, I had to be thinking not only for myself, but for every person that comes after me. That's number 1. And secondly, I knew that I had to be committed to actually taking the leave and not be like frazzled founder working on the side, just so that I could emulate for folks. I could really model, this is how you take a leave. And so, this was about 6 years ago. I went like this, how many weeks? And at the time there wasn't Plus. I think Plus was either in its infancy or was just starting out. And so I was Googling, I was referencing Facebook. I didn't know if that was relevant for us. there were not a lot of reference points. So we landed on 16 weeks paid leave. And I think it was only for mothers, and then dads had like a half of that or something. And that was like the best that I could do then, right? And it was all that I knew. And interestingly, coming into Kinsight, so this is my second company, the field had evolved tremendously. Plus had been doing advocacy now for a few years, hitting the ground and really establishing a model for everyone. And, the language was evolving. Now it was no longer about primary or secondary caretaker. It was just about caretakers. It was about having a family and all the different ways that you can help your family, that you have to be there for your family. And so now fast forward to Kinsight, it's interesting, like, I'm very proud of the policy we had at Honeybook, because we were doing the best we could then. And I'm really proud now how we've evolved at Kinsight, where right from the beginning, day one, new funding from venture capitalists, not making money, right? We really put a stake on the ground and said, first of all, we are a company that is aiming to change the field for working parents everywhere through childcare. It's in our ethos to also be there for the forming of a family or for taking care of a family or self. And we offer 12 weeks of fully paid family leave across the board, gender neutral. And it's just around, it could be for a new baby, a new family member, or an existing family member.
That's great. Orly, on that topic of this gender-informed paid leave and what do moms get, what do dads get, caregivers writ large, what advice do you have for the HR professionals and other business leaders on this call today that are looking to design these gender-informed and inclusive paid leave policies specifically?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that's the most important is that if you really are committed to equity in the workplace, especially gender equity, then it needs to be a gender neutral policy. And we've seen a lot of companies go in this direction of saying, okay, we'll have one policy for primary caregivers and one policy for secondary caregivers, and that's gender neutral language, so it would work. It's not gender neutral language, because the truth is culture overlays on top of policy. And we know that there are so many cultural messages telling men that they can't be the primary caregiver, and it forces families to choose really early on to create this false distinction that there should be a primary and a secondary caregiver instead of having equal caregiving at home. And the reason this is important for workplace policies, and there are many, but I like to borrow a quote from Anne Marie Slaughter, who says, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but it's something along the lines of, you can't have equality for women in the workplace unless you have equality for men at home. And I think that's just, we've never seen that be more clear in our society than right now during the pandemic, when so many women have been carrying this double burden of trying to work. This is for professional class women in particular, who are working from home on Zoom, but who are trying to work and manage 100% or 80% or some unequal share of the household management and childcare, which has caused over 2 million women to leave the workforce because it's simply an impossible act. And so I will say that that kind of gender neutral language in the policy is really critical. And then also encouraging them to actually take the full leave that they're entitled to. And I'll just say one thing about the kind of primary, secondary language. A lot of companies do this because they think it's going to save them money if they subtly encourage men to take less leave. They say, okay, well, men aren't going to raise their hands, and this is a way to appear gender neutral, but then, really we won't have men leave as much and we'll save money. You don't end up saving money, because when you look at the actual full scope of costs, Eve Rodsky, the New York Times bestselling author, recently had a line that she shared with me in a conversation we were having last week, where she said, we shouldn't call it paid leave, we should call it paid stay. Because really what paid leave does is it enables caregivers to stay in the workforce. If you don't have paid leave, people drop out of the workforce, and that costs money to our economy, but it also costs money to your company, because the costs, when you actually look at it, of rehiring and retraining for that position is much greater than any amount of money you would have to invest in the paid stay or paid leave. And there's a lot more we can say about all the benefits, of course, of having men more involved in caregiving, both for health and for the economy.
And Orly, that's a separate panel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would love to add to this that it was a few years ago, so that I was inspired by something David Hanrahan said. I believe he's a chief people officer at Eventbrite today.
Yeah.
And this is particular to knowledge workers and the professional industry. And that is that it actually doesn't cost you more, because you were already planning on paying for that salary for, let's say it's close 3 months. It's already baked into your budget at the beginning of the year. Whether that person is there or isn't there, it doesn't cost you actually any less, because you still need that person to come back and work. These are not jobs that are sort of replaceable, right? In a way that you could be like, oh, let me just hire a temp work. You usually don't hire temporary replacements for folks who take that leave. So from an economic perspective, I realized, oh, we're going to pay for this either way. We're going to pay for this. If it's about numbers, we're going to pay for this role. We're planning on paying for this role 3 months of this year. It's baked into the budget. So it doesn't make a difference. If anything, it makes a great difference to allow that person to be there for the family and to come back really in a vibrant way.
Can I add one more thing onto that? Because I think
Sure.
this is a really important point to make also when we're looking at the investment. One of the things obviously that we do is work with companies to help them transform their policies, but our ultimate goal is to pass a national paid family leave policy that would be a federal policy that would apply to everyone in the US. And one of the things that I think is particularly exciting about that conversation for companies is that what's now in conversation on Capitol Hill is a paid family leave policy that would be 100% paid for by the government, which means that the cost would come off of your balance sheet. It wouldn't affect your bottom line. And then any investment that companies are currently making into paid leave, they could apply that money to other benefits that they want to offer. Or in some cases, I agree, a lot of these jobs, temps can't replace them, but where you can come up with some contractor or temporary solution, companies could then invest the money in that. So anyway, that's just one reason why I think we're seeing a lot more companies step up and support national public policy on paid leave, because they care about equity and want to see it for everyone, but also because it would really help their bottom lines, especially for startups and medium-sized companies that, obviously have a harder time competing with companies that can, like Google or Facebook.
Mm-hmm. You bring up national paid leave, which we're going to get to in 1 second. But before we leave this topic of how you get employees to take the leave. Shadia, you talked about being a mom, and we're all moms here on this call and have all, taken various types of leave. What are other ways that people on this call can, whether they are employees or employers, how can they make sure that people take the leave or advocate for the leave? Because you mentioned the budgeting process, which is something that I haven't heard sort of explained by an employer. Like, what are other little details that people could understand? Like, I know one example I'll give is we did a briefing with the White House, and Jen Hyman, the CEO of Rent the Runway, she said, it actually is going to cost me more when that person leaves to go take care of a child or a sick relative, because I'm going to have to recruit someone new, train them, and then retain them. So I think that when we talk about bottom line and why it's good for a company financially to offer paid leave, we need to show those anecdotes, whether they be budget-based or retention-based. And I'd love to sort of hear your perspective as an employer and how it's worked at your two companies.
So I talk to other founders a lot who are in the earlier stages and say, what should we do in our company? And I'm like, immediately go to the very best that you can do. And they're like, it's because of what you're mentioning, the marginal difference between, they're like, is it 8 weeks, 12 weeks, 16 weeks? I'm like, the most. If you said 16, then that's what it is. Like, because the marginal difference between a 1 or 2 month, so this is assuming they're already going to do something, right? So assuming they're like, yes, we're going to implement a policy. I'm like, stretch it as much as you can within the limitations and the culture of your company and your runway and your cash flow. Okay. But stretch it as much as you can, because the marginal difference between 1 or 2 or even 3 months is nowhere in comparison to having to deal with every tech entrepreneur deals deeply with the pain of having to recruit talent. It's a super competitive industry. It's not just engineers, it's marketing managers, it's the best sales folks, it's the best customer service folks. Every role is a special snowflake, and we go above and beyond to pay exorbitant recruiting fees, right? We pay the best recruiters, the best agencies to get, to poach the best talent from this Facebook company or that other cool startup. So once you have that talent, you do not want to let them go. You want them to feel like they're at home. So in that case, look, when I've already spent 30 grand just on a recruiting fee to bring someone in, I don't mind, right? An outlay, if you will, of 10 to 12 grand, whatever that person's salary is, for an additional 1 or 2 months. So because I understand the deep pain of actually having recruited that person, not just money, but like finding the perfect folks to fit your culture is incredibly precious. And you don't want to rock that. So when you look at it that way, like, what's paying 3 months or 4 months of a person's salary so that they can be their full human selves, compared to the 3 to 4 to 5 years they're going to be with you in your company contributing. That's point one.
That. Yeah.
And I want to make another point, just really, really practically about, you mentioned earlier, how do you get folks to take it? I haven't seen a problem with women taking it because they had a baby or they have a baby and they're not sleeping, and it feels more acceptable and it feels more normal. Like, I haven't had a problem with women, like, I'll be back 4 months from now or whatever it is. It's the men, it's the dads, who we really, really have to encourage. And in fact, at Kinside, we have had of, let's say, 12 employees today, we've had 2 employees have babies while employed in the first year, and their fathers. And what we did is, like, we just set from the beginning the expectation, okay, your baby's coming. They sit with their manager, with my co-founder. What days are you going to, like, how many weeks are you going to take off? What's the cadence? And they're mind blown. They didn't even understand. Like, they're like, oh, I guess I have leave. And we're like, yes. And you can take it 12 weeks in the first year. Would you like, you could do like this, you could do like this. And we actually just modeled for them a few different models that they could choose. And that for them is, first of all, it's incredibly gratifying. They're so grateful to the company. And then finally, the fact that we actually set an expectation, we're like, what would you like? We're going to sit down and figure it out, because we also need to allocate resources for when you're away. It actually sets expectation that they will be taking that time off, and there's no taboo around it.
That's awesome.
Can I jump in with just one personal anecdote?
Go ahead, Orly.
I've lived this personally in my life. As you mentioned, we're all 3 of us are mothers here. My husband works in tech. And so tech is the sector that has the best paid paternity leave. Probably tech and finance are the 2 sectors. And so I was very lucky that with both of our children, he was able to take leave. And because companies in tech often do this flexible thing where you can take your leave spread out over the course of a year, the way that we staggered it was that he was able to take most of his leave when I went back to work. And the experience for me returning to the workforce and handing my baby over to the baby's father instead of to an unknown caregiver gave me the space to fully return to work and be really present and not worried, and know that our baby was safe and protected, and also gave him the experience of being the full-time solo caregiver. Like, he had to learn all these tricks for how he was going to fully parent. And I think it has helped us have equitable parenting in our household, which has enabled both of us to really thrive in our careers and not feel like we have to choose between who is actually in charge of household matters. So it's just a personal anecdote, but I think it really does make a difference.
Yes, that's a great anecdote. And while we're sharing anecdotes, I just want to share one myself that has to do with pregnancy and paid leave. So I was pregnant with my first child 7 years ago and was in between jobs. I was actually leaving Capitol Hill, working in the Senate, to go leave for the private sector. And I was interviewing while pregnant. Wasn't visibly pregnant until I got to the final stages of an interview process. And I was so nervous that I was going to blow it because they wouldn't hire me because I was at that point, 7.5, 8 months pregnant. And the woman who was the editor-in-chief of a well-known magazine, Cindy Levy, she said, we want to give you the job. And I said, okay, great. I'll take it. And she said, when can you start? And I said, immediately, but I'm having a baby in 6 weeks. So, what should we do about that? And she goes, well, work until you have the baby. And then after your leave, come back. Kind of like, why are you even asking me? And I I give that example because it wasn't the leave policy of the ownership company, but it was her policy. And since she was the boss, she decided, if I want good talent, I'm gonna get it when I can. And if she's gonna be, gone for 3 months, that's what the policy was 3 years ago, then it's worth it. It's gonna take me that much longer to find somebody else anyway. So if those of you who are in hiring positions and someone is pregnant, obviously, it's up to them to bring that information to you, but don't be deterred. I think especially for pregnant women, to put themselves out there in an interviewing process means they really, really want the job. So switching gears a little bit to national paid leave policy is on the table. And for those of you who don't know much about it, we're going to talk about it a little bit more here. And please, just a reminder to ask any questions you have on here. You've got an expert on these policies on this webinar. It's so exciting. For the first time in history, we have chance to get paid leave permanently written into law. However, it is not without a few political hurdles. So we're at this fulcrum point where it can be done, but we also are hearing from at Plus from our friends on the Hill and in the White House that the biggest hurdle and the biggest concern is that there won't be business support for paid leave. So Orly, I'd love it if you could just talk a little bit about, what you're seeing in terms of business support for President Biden's proposal.
Well, first, I think it's important just to clarify what's actually in the proposal that's out there right now, which is it's a proposal for 12 weeks of paid family leave that would include parental leave, family caregiving, or time to care for your own personal medical condition. So these are all of the things that currently are covered for many people under FMLA, which is unpaid leave. But the difference is this would layer on top of FMLA so that people who are taking what's now unpaid leave could apply directly to the government for a direct benefit. So they would get paid 2/3 of their salary while they're out by the government. And that would again enable employers to be able to take the money they were going to invest in leave and spend it on whatever backfill they need to spend it on or other investments and benefits. So I think actually we're seeing a lot of support from companies to the extent that companies are aware of it, because there's so much happening in Congress and in the news these days. I think there are still many companies that aren't yet aware that this is moving forward through Congress. But we're seeing a lot of support because they see that it's going to help their bottom line. And then I think also what I'm hearing from companies is just companies that have made a forward-facing commitment to equity and inclusion really are getting that if you really are committed to equity, then it can't just be equity for your employees. It has to be for your consumers too. And 113 million working people in this country do not have a single day of paid leave right now. So a way to help kind of act on that commitment to equity is to help make sure that it's not just a benefit for the privileged few to be there for your family when you need to be there. It's something that really needs to be available to everyone. Oh, and I'll also say the other interesting thing about the bill is that it does also include independent contractors. And I know we've all seen a huge growth in the contractor workforce. And those are folks that are largely left out of really critical benefits. And so this would be a way for those folks to be able to access the benefits that they need.
Right. Thanks for pointing that out. Shadia, how is this going to impact your business?
I mean, I am thrilled. So first of all, I can't imagine, like, there's going to be a social reckoning with employers. And I hate to be, I don't want to sound adversarial to the employer-based system. I am an employer, and God bless the American employer-based system for its resilience and an ability to really provide social benefits to folks where government traditionally supports them, such as health insurance. But I do think that there's going to be an opportunity for me personally, and I would expect for many of their employers to actually up the ante, to say, great, look, 12 weeks of paid leave at 2/3 is still not a full paycheck, right? So first of all, I would expect that that folks would make them at least whole. So again, we're talking about folks in sectors that are mature and like finance, not mature, but sectors that are just tend to be a little more cash flow positive. I would expect them to match up to whole. It's something that we're already doing, but also I think there's an opportunity here to even sweeten the pot, to say, look, we were already offering 12 weeks fully paid. What if we apply, now this is nuts, so don't hold me to this, but what if we apply some more of those weeks? What if we actually make it a 5-month leave, right? What if we make it a 4 or 5 or 6 month leave? Because I do think that even though I'm incredibly happy for the progress that we're making socially and politically, to actually even getting to a point where we're discussing a federal paid leave program, where that hasn't historically culturally been the most organic part of the conversation in this country. We're still far behind. To even be talking about just 12 weeks at 2/3 pay, to me, is not sufficient to actually support families in the most incredibly vulnerable moments of their lives. So I would love to see us move towards a place where we're supporting, where like 6 months leave is a norm. And in the government, but this will only happen if the government steps in, because it's true, employers cannot hold this burden on their own. Employers can only do so much. And I'm really glad to see that the government is really kind of meeting us halfway, especially those of us employers that already are making a stake and we have an interest in supporting this type of policy.
Thanks for pointing that out. I think that someone in the chat or the Q&A asked specifically about small businesses. You hear that as a common refrain as well. Well, I'd love to offer leave, but I can't afford it for my business. We have, 5, 10 employees. So Orly, can you speak to the small business question there? You're on mute.
Sorry. First, I'm just going to drop into the chat a quick link for folks. So we have an open letter to Congress that we've created for businesses of all sizes. We have a lot of small businesses that have signed on to it. And these are companies that are saying, we want to see a national paid leave program because it helps our company. It's good for business. So that's one way that small businesses can get involved. And I'll also say that, we're really seeing a lot of small businesses chime in because they really want to be able to do right by their employees. They have personal relationships with the folks that they work with in a very deep way. And they care about their employees and their families. And I think it breaks the hearts of a lot of small business owners when someone in their family, has a family member, someone in their workplace has a family member who gets cancer, or someone is dealing with a parent with Alzheimer's, or all kinds of serious problems that they know are really weighing on that employee, and the employee needs time to be able to handle it so that they can come back and be present at work, and the employer just can't afford it right now. So if you can't afford it, I think advocating for public policy is a great way to really help your own company, because passing that policy would help businesses of all sizes. And I will say that there are a number of states. I'm in California. California has a state-based program. We've had a program here for over 10 years. That's like a statewide paid family leave insurance program. There are 7 states that already have that, I think soon to be 9, but in the other states, there's nothing. And because California's program has been around for a decade, they've been able to do studies where they've looked at what the impact has been of the state-based paid family leave program on companies of all sizes. And employers in California are reporting that it's really a positive effect, or at very worst, a neutral effect, that there's really no negative effect for having a governmental paid leave program, and that in most cases it helps their businesses. So we want to kind of take the best successes of the state-based programs, learn from those, and apply that to the national program, so we can really create something that works for employees and employers alike.
Orly, just following up on that, you mentioned the 250 businesses. I just wanted to point out that those are both large businesses, Levi's, and small businesses, startups, like Ken said. So I think that it's important to note that we are working with our friends in the White House and on the Hill to bring those voices of both small businesses and large businesses to say, this is good for our business. We need this, both large and small. Can you just speak a little bit to our audience about how they might get involved if they're new to this issue, or maybe they've been working on it for a while within their company? Is there a way that they could get involved and help with PLUS's efforts?
Absolutely. Okay, so there are a few different ways. In terms of the public policy side, sign our open letter to Congress if you can. There's also we're setting up, lobby meetings with senators and members of Congress where businesses of all sizes, large business, small business owners are actually meeting with their representatives and senators over Zoom. If that's something that you could see your company doing, please reach out, let us know. I'll drop my personal email for work into the chat. We're looking for companies to do that of all sizes, but in specific states right now, including Virginia, Arizona, West Virginia, and Nevada. If you're in any of those states, you can be especially impactful. But then I'll also say that there's other ways you can make a difference at your own company, just in updating your own company's policy. And that's the side of our work that we're still doing a lot of work on. I'll add a link to our resource page for companies that want to update their policy, but we also will do one-on-one consultations with your company. So that's how we help to update and improve the policies at Thumbtack and Postmates and Sun Life. We will do one-on-one, totally pro bono consultations with you to help change your company policy. And I'll say that applies if you're in the HR department, and that also applies if you're just an employee who wants to advocate at your company for a better and more equal policy for all. We have a whole guidebook we can share with you of exactly how to do that, including things like, here's the email template to request a meeting with HR. Here's a sample PowerPoint. Like, we will make it very easy for you. We like to think of it as the cubicle army. We know that most of the changes that are happening in workplaces actually come from ERGs or even just from individual employees who are really pushing and advocating to win change for everyone. So that's a way that you can use your voice internally for good.
Great. And Orly, are you taking new signatures, new businesses to this 250
Yes,
business
please.
letter?
Every day. We have new companies signing on every day. And as Giovanna mentioned, it's, we have big companies like Levi's and Pinterest and Salesforce and Rent the Runway and Eventbrite and all these big companies, but we also have small and medium-sized businesses. So please encourage your company to sign on. And then also, most of you have broad professional networks where I'm sure you could think of other companies and small business owners that that might be interested in advocating for paid leave, so you could encourage them to sign on too. And the letter is not specifically endorsing any bill, so it should be easy for companies to sign on to. It's really a way for companies to say, we agree that there should be a national paid leave policy that would help all businesses.
Great. Before we wrap up, please put your questions in the chat. We would be happy to answer them. Orly or Shadia can answer questions now. We've got some time here. I've been monitoring the Q&A, and I think we've gotten to all of them. Let's see, can we access scheduling that meeting from the website above? Yes, you can. Orly's on mute, but I'll answer for her. You can reach out to Orly specifically.
Yes, you can reach out to me. I'll share my email in the chat.
Okay, any other questions? All right, I'll give people another 30 seconds as I wrap up here. Okay, so call to action. Sign the PLUS business letter, whether you are a small business, a startup, or work for a large business. We'll make it easy for you. Shadia, thank you so much for giving your firsthand experience on specific ways that companies can encourage paid leave. They're taking it or planning for it as they're starting their businesses. If there's anything else that either of you would like to say, please do. Otherwise, I'll just wrap us up. Okay. Thank you all so much. Again, there'll be a recording. I think Samantha can do the final thanks. Happy to start the day with all of you.
Thank you again so much to Orly, Shadia, and Giovanna for a wonderful conversation. Thank you everybody who joined in today. As I mentioned before, we will be sending out the recording later this afternoon straight to your inbox, along with some more information about PLUS and some great resources that you can access. So be on the lookout for that. But without further ado, I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and we'll catch you at the next one. Bye.